Have fun! Play the game! Do the mechanic right! No, not like that! Vuln stack for you! Damage down for you! Play it right! Final Fantasy XIV has, by design, an interesting obsession with trying to make you do things right. And by right, quote unquote, I of course mean the way the designer wants you to do it. What is kind of funny about this is that most of the time, the punishment for getting it wrong is bad enough or clear enough that you at least know that the game is telling you that you goofed it. But a lot of the time, it is simultaneously not punishing enough to really, really hurt. And this leads to an interesting scenario where mechanics end up being made to build debuff stacks rather than kill, and players sometimes end up focusing on doing the mechanic right just to not receive the "you did it wrong" sticker, or alternatively, realize that it doesn't matter anyway, and ignore mechanics if they can't kill, sometimes leading to healers adjust, which sort of undercuts the whole point of the system in the first place, and is indeed a problem that has been attempted to be fixed over the years. But are we missing the trees for the forest here? To start, I'm not just looking at boss design and then gesturing wildly everywhere crying fault. I have a few select topics where this focus on "do it right" or else appears very much front and center, in a general enough context that it expands beyond the individual topic, at least in my opinion. That said, there's always a reasonable limit to a problem like this. For example, 14 has decided to center on the MSQ. In a way, that is a pretty solid example of controlling how you play the game. But at the same time, every game sets some ground rules, and deciding that you have to do quest A before quest B is probably fair, and the problems with the MSQ are more suited for a different video. Which brings us back to the topic of boss design. The vast majority of bosses in Final Fantasy XIV have avoidable mechanics, and when you don't avoid them, the most common punishment is that you take damage. Wow, I know, shocker. In harder content, failing such a mechanic is more likely to kill you outright, but isn't always guaranteed to. An additional, very common bonus punishment for failing to dodge a mechanic is a vulnerability debuff stack, also often shortened to Vuln stack. This increases the damage you take from all future damage, typically for the next 100 seconds. And if you mess up again, the Vuln stack builds higher and higher, until eventually, presumably, an attack that before was perfectly survivable now kills you outright. A positive of an effect like this is that the game communicates extremely clearly when you were supposed to dodge that. This kind of effect also means that a mechanic can hit more softly on the first offense, the first mistake, and only really punish you if you keep messing it up, which can be nice for more low-stakes casual encounters. The negatives of such an effect, however, are a lot when you think about it. While Vuln stacks as punishment for failing to dodge is incredibly common, not all avoidable mechanics give a punishment aside from damage. When players are taught that mechanics they are meant to dodge give Vuln stacks, mechanics that are avoidable but don't give Vuln stacks can sometimes be lost in the mix. A line AoE that points at the tank might be perceived as a tank buster until the day the player randomly tries to sidestep it and succeeds. The second negative is the so-called healer adjust approach. Getting a Vuln stack means that you're taking more damage, but when it really comes to it, this is more of a problem for the healer than specifically for you, unless you are the healer, of course. Unless you collect so many stacks that you die outright with nothing the healer can do for you, it's not really truly your problem. This means that players that are not particularly concerned about getting bad boy stickers might not actually care to dodge a mechanic that just gives a Vuln stack, but is otherwise perfectly survivable, effectively nullifying the point of the mechanic to begin with. The third negative is more a product of this design choice. If boss mechanics build an escalating damage debuff for consecutive mistakes, then the damage of those mechanics are likely balanced around the assumption that you won't die from the first infraction. At least, not always. Let's say an avoidable mechanic is balanced such that it can kill appropriately geared DPS characters if they have 3 Vuln stacks. Let's say for the example that the Vuln stacks increase damage taken by 20%. Fun fact, while Vuln stacks never really explain their percentage increase, they tend to vary wildly. Then, the attack needs to do around 2/3 of a DPS's HP without Vuln stacks to reach that damage number at 3 stacks. Interestingly, a lot of non-extreme content do hit around that number, which often means that the way you die to such a mechanic is more commonly because of multiple attacks landing in quick succession, each balanced around the assumption that you need a few Vuln stacks for it to kill, but if they strike back to back, you don't get time to recover. This problem of players going, wait, it doesn't kill me? And ignoring mechanics in Savage content started to really reach a boiling point around Shadowbringers and hit a peak in Endwalker, when mechanics now more and more frequently in harder content were changed to instead give damage down debuffs, reducing damage output as punishment instead. Some of the most extreme cases of damage down from failing mechanics reach upwards of 75% or more lost damage, reaching a point where, practically speaking, the player's better off letting themselves die to the next opportunity to get rid of the damage down debuff itself. There are also some really funny cases where a mechanic that will one-shot doesn't ignore tank invulnerabilities, but instead applies a huge damage down. What I find interesting about both of these punishments is that they both cause players to focus more on the punishment itself rather than the difficulty of avoiding the hit to begin with. The punishment itself also heavily limits creativity or choice in how to deal with the mechanic. Yes, I'm perfectly aware that a Circle AoE doesn't offer much space for creativity either, but let me give you an example. You're a melee DPS, and the boss is doing a Circle AoE that will require you to run out of it. Option 1. The attack may hurt, but mainly applies a Vuln stack that makes future mechanics hurt more. Optimal choice may likely be to stay in and just get healed through it. Option 2. The attack hurts, but applies a damage down that more than nullifies any value you'd get from staying in. Optimal choice is pretty much always to get out. Option 3. The attack might actually kill you outright without defensive cooldowns of some sort, but that is all it does. Optimal choice may depend on what cooldowns you have, what your tank has, what your healer has. You make a choice on whether the uptime is worth it. And sure, maybe staying in becomes a prevailing choice among the better players. But is that a problem? Job design. A somewhat regular complaint about job changes over the years is that it sometimes feels like jobs are being adjusted to enforce playing them in a specific way, which is mainly highlighted when some wacky, janky rotation actually is better than what you'd think is intuitively correct. Other times, a job has a few options in how they want to do it that is then reduced to one way due to the changes. For a recent example of the first case, Endwalker Black Mage's non-standard rotation chaos relied upon the fact you didn't need a specific number of fire forecasts per astral fire to get creative, and often would only fit like 5, for instance. With the addition of Flare Star in Dawntrail, demanding that you use 6 Fire Force to access it, it now felt like you had to do 6. And when players briefly found that there were non-standard paths that could sort of compete without using Flare Star's potency got buffed. I'm not here trying to pass judgment on whether it was the right call, but I do hope you see the correlation with the topic at hand. For an example of the second case, although far more vague, originally, Gunbreaker's Bloodfest had a cooldown of 90 seconds, which due to its misalignment with No Mercy meant you had to choose between getting as many cartridges as possible, using it on cooldown, or getting the cartridges where they would be the most helpful, during No Mercy, adding 30 seconds of extra wait time. Midway through Endwalker, Bloodfest's cooldown was increased up to 2 minutes and was not accompanied by anything to quote-unquote compensate, just removing the decision-making. Another slightly random example is combos. Take a Warrior's Storm's Path combo. Heavy Swing does damage, Maim does damage and generates resources, Storm's Path does damage, generates more resources, and heals you. But for Maim and Storm's Path, only if you do it in the right combo sequence. If you do it out of order, not only does Maim and Storm's Path not generate resources or heal, they also do less damage than Heavy Swing. The only thing missing when you accidentally press them is a loud womp womp trombone sound or your character slipping and goofing up the animation. long story short, the only reason you'd ever use them out of order is if for some reason you need the attack to do less damage. But you have better moves for that too. So it would kind of make more sense for the attack simply to be unavailable if you're not at the correct combo step. But to maintain the system of rewarding you for doing it right and allowing you to do it wrong and get punished a bit for it, they're kept available. Dungeon design. Especially when it comes to non-boss mobs, we actually kind of see how not giving players dummy stickers for failing a mechanic sometimes can play out. Some AoE pulls have enemies that use wide circle AoEs and whatnot, but if all it does is some non-lethal damage, some players will outright choose to ignore it. The primary incentive to dodge these mechanics from regular mobs is almost always some side effect like a stun or paralysis, because they rarely ever do enough damage for that alone to be the reason you dodge. And then there are mobs like those medics in Mesoterminal that use an attack that does 50% of your max HP in damage. I've also previously suggested that the reason why AoE pulls are so restricted in newer content, 2-packs wall anyone, is to prevent disagreements in parties, but design forcing you to do things a specific way is also a way to interpret it. By heavily restricting the options players have in a duty, you can much more easily predict what they will do, and it also makes it much less likely that some future change will affect this content later down the line. For example, a duty like good old Stone Vigil opens with 5 separate packs and a boss, and gives you the freedom to pull wherever you want, meaning you could pull them 1 at a time, 2, 2, 1 then boss, 3, 2 then boss, 5 then boss, or straight up everything, or some other combination. And the main deciding factor on what you actually end up doing partly depends on the skill level of your team. As jobs have become stronger due to power creep, bigger and bigger pulls in this dungeon have become more common, which I suppose culminated in the Dawntrail quality of life change, where pulling a boss causes a checkpoint to spawn, meaning that pulling everything and the boss becomes even more optimal, since wiping means you skip all of the mobs. Although, back in the day, players would sometimes skip packs in a duty like this by simply having the tank pull everything, die in the boss room, get raised, and then you fight the boss on its own. So when I say this old design leaves a lot of player freedom, I really mean it. Compare this to a duty like, I don't know, Stormbloods the Burn, which does the classic 2-packs wall boss design. What is particularly funny about this one is that there is a pack near the end of the duty that is skippable, quote unquote, in that you can sneak past it and fight the next pack over on its own. But because the wall doesn't disappear until all of the mobs have been defeated, you can't actually skip the pack due to this strict design. I imagine being able to sneak past a pack in the first place is an oversight, but due to the strictness of the design, it doesn't matter. The player options are clear pack 1, then pack 2, clear pack 2, then pack 1, or clear both. Only once you've done one of these 3 options, you can proceed, making player choices very predictable. But also making cool discoveries like this very deflating, since you can't do anything with it anyway. Why think outside the box when the game punishes doing so? Air Force 1. What originally gave me the idea for this video was realizing how content such as Air Force 1 in the Gold Saucer also reflects this kind of restrictive design, and I'm sure many other minigames and so on do too. Air Force 1 is a silly shooting gallery minigame where you must shoot the bronze, silver and gold targets, but never the bomb targets. For many players, the minigame is considered easy enough that getting any less than 5,000 points, a perfect score, requires you to massively screw up or not pay attention. This is partly due to how slow the minigame goes and how fast you can go. You can shoot as fast as you can press the button, and on a mouse, you can move the targeting reticle as fast as you can move your mouse. Additionally, every Air Force 1 stage, as there are a few, has precisely one layout for all the targets, meaning that if you felt like it, you could memorize the whole sequence to make things even easier. To me, it feels like the shooting systems were made first, and then, for whatever reason it may be, the stage design ended up being rather slow and stiff, and then, to not make things too easy, The bomb targets were added too. They usually spawn in front of the actual targets, so you can't just spam shoot recklessly all over the place. It is as if they designed the player side of the game for frantic, high-paced, silly, crazy shooting, only for the game environment to be so slowed down that all they could do to try and prevent players from just completely overwhelming it is to put bad boy targets there. Of course, having targets to avoid in a shooting gallery makes sense, but the overall design just feels like they were added to compensate for the overall slowness of the content. But with all that rambling aside, what do you think? Do you feel this "no, you have to do it the right way" thing in 14 content? Maybe in content I haven't talked about here. Maybe you feel like I'm absolutely insane for thinking or even suggesting this idea. But I would love to hear about it in the comments. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Twitch or Ko-Fi. Links in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, back in the day, a lot of weapon skills broke combo, which meant that starting a combo like the warrior one did sort of mean you were locked in on that combo until you finished it. For example, Tomahawk broke combo. Now, I don't know for sure if Inner Beast originally broke combo back in A Realm Reborn, and I don't have any sources to suggest whether it did or didn't, but if you know, be sure to let me know.